Ethan Carter had always believed that silence was a kind of language, one that revealed truths people rarely dared to speak. The quiet, dense forest that surrounded the new research base felt like a continuation of that belief. It was peaceful, but it held secrets. When he and his partner Clara moved to the edge of the wildlife preserve, he thought it would be a fresh beginning, a chance to mend what routine and distance had quietly damaged between them. But beginnings, he was learning, had a way of testing what was already fragile. Clara noticed the shift before Ethan did. The way his attention drifted during breakfast, the way he stared out at the misty horizon longer than necessary, as if waiting for something to appear. She tried to fill the silence with conversation, stories about the house, the neighbors, the endless unpacking, but his responses came slower each day. He wasn't cold, just absent, like someone walking through FOGE.at the research facility. Ethan found himself absorbed in a new assignment, an environmental study focused on the migratory behavior of forest mammals. It was the kind of work that demanded patience and observation, both qualities he possessed in abundance. When the project coordinator introduced a new field assistant, a volunteer from an environmental NGO in Kenya, Ethan hardly looked up at first. But when Malik Kato entered the room, something about the man's calm presence caught his attention. Malik was unlike anyone Ethan had worked with before. He was confident but not loud, his movements deliberate, his smile easy yet restrained. There was a steadiness about him that seemed to quiet the noise around him. During the briefing, he listened more than he spoke, nodding thoughtfully as though every detail carried weight. When their eyes met briefly across the table, Ethan felt something unspoken pass between them, a faint recognition, not of familiarity, but of intrigue. Over the next week, their paths crossed often. Malik assisted with data collection, sometimes joining Ethan in the lab to review samples or note field results. Their conversations began formally, technical, precise, but gradually drifted into personal territory. Malik spoke of his homeland, of dry seasons and green valleys, of how nature taught him patience. Ethan, in turn, found himself sharing small details about his own life, his love for the rain, his unease with crowds, his habit of collecting old maps. Clara noticed that he returned home later each evening. When she asked if the workload was heavy, Ethan simply nodded, adding that Malik was efficient and that the team's progress depended on long hours. She smiled politely but watched his face as he spoke, sensing that something had changed beneath his calm surface. The first real sign came a week later, during a team meeting. The institute announced an upcoming field assessment, a 3-day survival and observation exercise deep inside the jungle. 2-person teams would venture out to test their endurance and record nocturnal animal activity. Ethan volunteered immediately, surprising even himself with how quickly he raised his hand. When the coordinator asked for his chosen partner, he said Malik's name without hesitation. Later that night, Clara asked why he hadn't picked one of his longtime colleagues. Ethan shrugged. Malik's reliable. He's good in the field, he said, though even to himself, the words felt rehearsed. She said nothing more, only reached across the table to squeeze his hand. Her touch was warm, familiar, yet something inside him stayed distant, unreachable. In the days leading up to the expedition, Ethan felt an unfamiliar restlessness. He told himself it was the anticipation of the fieldwork, the challenge of navigating wild terrain. But beneath that reasoning pulsed a quieter truth, curiosity. He wanted to understand Malik beyond the polite exchanges and professional boundaries. There was a depth to him, a quiet confidence that drew Ethan closer, not through words but through presence. The morning of departure arrived with a mist that hung low over the trees. Clara helped him pack, folding his clothes neatly, slipping a small note into the side pocket of his bag. "For when you can't sleep," she said with a faint smile. Ethan kissed her forehead, thanked her softly, and promised to call once they returned. She watched from the porch as he loaded his gear into the truck, her hand raised in a wave that lingered long after he disappeared down the dirt road. The drive to the jungle was long, winding through narrow paths and forgotten villages. Malik sat beside him, occasionally pointing out a tree species or the tracks of a wild animal in the dust. Their conversation was sparse but comfortable. There was a rhythm between them, built not from familiarity but from a shared understanding of solitude. By the time they reached the forest base, the sun had dipped low, staining the sky in shades of gold and crimson. They unloaded their supplies, checked their equipment, and set up camp by a small river clearing. The sound of flowing water mingled with the distant calls of unseen creatures. Malik gathered wood for the fire while Ethan assembled the tent, their movements wordless yet synchronized. As the flames rose, Malik sat across from Ethan, his face illuminated by the orange light. He began to speak about his childhood, the sound of drums on nights of celebration, the scent of rain on dry earth. His voice carried warmth, unhurried, almost melodic. Ethan listened, drawn in by the simple honesty of it. When Malik asked about his life, Ethan hesitated before answering. He spoke of his city, his studies, his relationship with Clara, but his words felt thin, as if describing someone else's existence. The night deepened, the forest alive with whispers. A silence stretched between them, neither heavy nor awkward, just present. Malik looked into the fire, then at Ethan. "Sometimes," he said softly, "we go far to find what we were afraid to see close to home." Ethan didn't reply. The words lingered in his mind long after Malik turned away. He thought of Clara, of their quiet dinners, their unspoken distance, and wondered what he was truly searching for in this place. The forest around them seemed to pulse with unseen life. Crickets hummed, the river murmured, and the fire crackled in small bursts. Ethan felt both alone and understood in a way he couldn't name. It wasn't attraction he felt, not yet, but recognition, as though Malik's presence mirrored something hidden within himself. When he finally lay down inside the tent, the night air cool against his skin, he could still hear Malik moving outside, humming a faint tune in his native tongue. The melody faded slowly, leaving Ethan awake with thoughts that refused to quiet. Tomorrow, they would begin their test, 3 days alone in the wilderness. But even now, Ethan sensed that what awaited them wasn't merely a test of survival. It would be something deeper, quieter, and far more revealing. That he closed his eyes, listening to the forest breathe. The silence, once familiar, now carried a question he wasn't sure he wanted answered. Ethan couldn't stop thinking about the moment Aiden had lingered in his room the night before. It wasn't that anything had happened, at least not in any tangible sense, but the air between them had shifted in a way Ethan couldn't ignore. Each glance, each accidental touch, now seemed loaded with unspoken possibilities. He tried to push the thoughts away during classes and library sessions, burying himself in assignments and group projects, but Aiden's presence lingered in the corners of his mind, like a shadow that refused to dissipate. The following afternoon, Aiden found another excuse to appear. Ethan had been sitting cross-legged on his bed, headphones in, lost in a world of music that usually calmed him, when the door creaked. "Hey," Aiden said casually, leaning against the frame with that same effortless charm. "You got a second?" Ethan removed his headphones and forced a neutral expression. "Yeah, what's up?" Aiden stepped inside, closing the door behind him. "I was thinking about that assignment for Professor Lang. You know, the one with the essay on ethics in literature. I could use your perspective." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "You're asking me? You usually just wing it." Aiden shrugged, smirk tugging at his lips. "Maybe I like hearing your take. You always seem thoughtful." The compliment sent an unexpected jolt through Ethan. He tried to focus on the essay rather than the subtle warmth spreading across his chest, the slight catch in his breath when Aiden's shoulder brushed against his as they bent over the notes. It was easy to convince himself that it was innocent, academic even, but the tension was unmistakable. As they talked, Aiden leaned closer under the pretext of pointing out a passage in Ethan's notebook. Their knees touched briefly, a fleeting contact that Ethan's mind replayed endlessly afterward. He could feel the pull of curiosity mingled with guilt, and a part of him wondered if he should say something, establish boundaries, before this escalated any further. Yet when he looked at Aiden's relaxed, open expression, the words failed him. Over the next few days, this pattern continued. Aiden seemed to find more reasons to be around Ethan, sometimes in shared spaces like the kitchen or living room, sometimes in private areas under innocuous pretenses. Each encounter was a delicate dance, balanced between casual familiarity and something more charged, leaving Ethan both exhilarated and anxious. One evening, Ethan confided in Lila over a video call. "It's complicated," he admitted, staring at the grainy image of her smiling face. "He's just... I don't know. He's everywhere, in a way I can't quite explain." Lila frowned, concern knitting her brow. "Ethan, are you saying he makes you uncomfortable?" "No. Not uncomfortable. I don't know how to describe it," Ethan said, rubbing the back of his neck. "It's like... I can't stop noticing him. Every look, every little thing, it's confusing." "Sounds like he's messing with your head," Lila said bluntly. "Be careful. You need to set limits before it goes too far." Ethan nodded, knowing she was right, but the thought of confronting Aiden about it felt impossible. He wasn't sure if it was just him overthinking, or if Aiden was actually aware of the effect he had on him. And even if he tried to set boundaries, what would stop this magnetic pull that seemed to draw him toward his stepbrother no matter how hard he resisted? The next day, the tension reached a new peak. Ethan had been lounging on the couch in the living room, scrolling through notes for class, when Aiden joined him, casually dropping onto the cushions beside him. "You're always buried in work," Aiden said, nudging him gently with his shoulder. "Don't you ever relax?" Ethan attempted a small smile. "I guess not enough." Aiden leaned back, stretching his long legs in a way that seemed deliberately relaxed, his presence commanding attention even in the quiet living room. He spoke about his own assignments, his voice low and measured, yet there was a subtle undertone in his tone that seemed directed at Ethan in particular. Every word, every glance, carried a weight Ethan couldn't quite place, a silent question hidden behind casual conversation. That evening, after everyone had gone to bed, Ethan found himself alone in his room, replaying every interaction, every fleeting touch, every look. The tension was almost unbearable. He realized that he hadn't been able to stop thinking about Aiden since the moment he had entered his room that first night. And now, there was a certainty gnawing at him, something had shifted between them. The line he had been trying to maintain wasn't just blurred, it was beginning to fade. Aiden's influence extended beyond presence. Ethan noticed himself becoming more attentive to his appearance, more aware of how he moved, how he spoke. Subtle gestures, adjusting his posture, smoothing his hair, even rehearsing what he might say in casual conversation, suddenly seemed necessary. He hated the realization, yet a part of him was drawn to it, unable to resist the pull of Aiden's attention. The climax of this escalation came one night when Ethan returned to his room after a late-night walk. The soft glow of the desk lamp illuminated Aiden, sitting casually on the edge of his bed, pretending to read a book. "Hey," Aiden said without looking up. "Didn't expect you back so soon." Ethan froze in the doorway, the familiar rush of confusion and anticipation crashing over him. "I just needed some air," he said, stepping inside cautiously. Aiden set the book aside, leaning back on his hands. "You know," he began casually, "it's nice when we get a moment alone. Feels different, doesn't it?" Ethan's chest tightened. He didn't know whether to respond, to retreat, or to speak what he felt but could not. The unspoken tension between them was tangible now, electric, hovering in the space of the room. It was as if every word, every gesture, every glance had been building to this exact moment. He swallowed hard. "Yeah, different," he admitted softly, the word almost betraying more than he intended. Aiden's eyes met his, and for a heartbeat, the world seemed to shrink to that small, charged space. Ethan knew that the next move, whether spoken or silent, would change everything. And deep down, he feared, and secretly hoped, that it would. Ethan lay on his bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying the moments of the past few weeks in his mind. Each encounter with Aiden felt like a puzzle he could not solve. Every glance, every accidental brush of a hand, every casual comment seemed loaded with intent. His emotions were tangled, a confusing mix of curiosity, fear, and something dangerously close to desire. He knew boundaries had been tested, and perhaps, in subtle ways, crossed. Yet he was still unsure where Aiden stood, or even where he himself belonged in this web of uncertainty. that night, the house was unusually quiet. The soft hum of the refrigerator and the distant creak of the floorboards were the only sounds. Ethan's thoughts were interrupted by a faint knock at the door. Aiden's voice followed, casual, almost teasing, "Mind if I come in?" Ethan hesitated. Part of him wanted to keep the door closed, to preserve the fragile sense of control he still had. But another part, the part that had been caught in the pull of this magnetic tension, nudged him to step aside. "Yeah, come in," he said softly, his voice betraying more than he intended. Aiden entered, moving with the same effortless ease that had unnerved Ethan from the start. He leaned casually against the desk, watching Ethan with an expression that was almost unreadable. "You've been quiet tonight," he observed, voice low. "Thinking about something, or someone?" Ethan felt heat rise to his cheeks. He opened his mouth to speak, then paused, realizing that words would fail him. Instead, he simply nodded, and the silence between them grew heavier. There was no overt action, no spoken confession, only the charged weight of unspoken emotions. Aiden stepped closer, not invasively, but with deliberate proximity that made the air itself feel tense. "Look, Ethan," he said carefully, "I know things have been strange between us. I don't want to make you uncomfortable, but I also don't want to pretend there's nothing here." Ethan's heart raced. The honesty in Aiden's tone both terrified and fascinated him. He wanted to retreat, to insist on boundaries, but the vulnerability in Aiden's words made him pause. There was an unspoken truth hanging in the room, that they had reached a point where avoidance was no longer possible. I don't know what to say," Ethan admitted, voice barely above a whisper. "I've been trying to understand myself, and this." Aiden nodded, as though he understood entirely. "You don't have to say anything. I want you to know I respect you, and I don't want to push too far. But I also don't want to hide what I feel." For the first time, Ethan realized that their connection wasn't merely about curiosity or tension, it was real, and it carried consequences. He thought about the delicate balance they had maintained, the boundaries that had been tested and, in small ways, crossed. He knew that how he responded now would shape everything between them, and possibly the family dynamic as well. Ethan took a deep breath. I need some space. Not from you entirely, just clarity. I can't let this, whatever it is, take over my judgment." Aiden regarded him quietly for a long moment, then nodded. "I get it. Take the time you need. I'll respect it." His tone was firm but gentle, conveying a mixture of understanding and lingering interest. The next few days were a period of careful adjustment. Ethan and Aiden maintained polite distance, yet the tension had shifted from uncertainty to something more subdued, more controlled. They spoke when necessary, shared meals and casual conversation, but the previous undercurrent of charged encounters was tempered by mutual awareness. Ethan noticed, with a strange mixture of relief and disappointment, that the magnetic pull had not disappeared entirely, it had simply been restrained, contained within boundaries they had both agreed to acknowledge, at least silently. During this time, Ethan confided in Lila more openly. "It's complicated," he said over coffee at their usual cafe. "We've acknowledged it, I guess. There's tension, but we're trying to manage it." Lila studied him carefully. "Sounds like you two are walking a tightrope," she said. "Just make sure you don't fall. Boundaries aren't just rules, they're protection." Ethan nodded, appreciating her wisdom. He realized that managing emotions didn't mean suppressing them entirely, it meant understanding them, recognizing their impact, and choosing actions that maintained integrity and self-respect. Back at home, Aiden's presence became less overwhelming, yet every encounter still carried a subtle spark. Ethan found himself noticing small gestures, a glance that lingered slightly too long, a smile that held unspoken meaning, but he no longer allowed these moments to dictate his emotional state. He had learned to navigate the tension without being consumed by it. One evening, after finishing a late-night study session, Ethan found Aiden waiting outside his room. They exchanged a quiet nod, an acknowledgement of the unspoken understanding they had reached. "Hey," Aiden said softly. "Thanks for handling things the way you did." It wasn't easy, I know. Ethan offered a small smile. Yeah, it wasn't. But I think we both needed it. And I think we're okay. Aiden's expression softened, a faint glimmer of respect and relief in his eyes. Yeah. I think so too. In that moment, Ethan realized that the line had been crossed in small, emotional ways, but it had also been reinforced in others. They had tested boundaries, confronted their emotions, and emerged with a clearer understanding of themselves and each other. The tension that had once felt unbearable was now tempered with awareness, control, and cautious respect. Ethan returned to his bed, the weight of uncertainty lifted slightly. He knew that his relationship with Aiden would continue to evolve, that moments of tension might arise again, but he also understood that he had agency over how those moments shaped him. The lesson was clear: attraction and curiosity were natural, but they did not have to override judgment, consent, or self-respect. As he closed his eyes, Ethan felt a strange mixture of relief and lingering curiosity. There was still a spark between them, a quiet, unspoken connection that promised complexity in the future, but for now, balance had been restored. And that, he realized, was enough to navigate the days ahead with clarity, strength, and a cautious hope for what might come next.